Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Healthcare Connector. This is Dion, and we are here with another voice in healthcare that I really wanted to highlight and spotlight. So, y'all know I don't beat around the bush. We're going to jump right in. Sandra, tell everybody about yourself, what you do, and all that good stuff.
All righty, I can. So I am a nurse practitioner, and I work currently in urology. I'm a proceduralist, so I do a very interesting job. I actually do cystoscopies, which is where you take a probe and you go up into the bladder and you evaluate the bladder. And then, which is really cool. And I do biopsies of the prostate, which is not as fun for the patient, but definitely still a very technical procedure in the urology department. And then I also do a little more complex procedures with radiology. And so I'll take pictures of kidneys from and through the ureter. And then I get to, I burn bladder tumors out of people's bladders as well to save them a trip from the operating room. And so, that's my day job. And then at night, I am the host of the Doctor Nurse podcast, which is a podcast for nurses and nurse practitioners or anyone that's interested in the nursing field that really wants to know what options you have with a nursing degree. And so I'm showcasing nurses that are creating careers for themselves with a business mindset, with a freedom mindset, a mindset of I can be the captain of my own ship, my own career. And that's really what I like to showcase on my podcast. So that's what I'm doing. And then my best job is mom and wife. Those are my two favorite and best jobs that I get to do as primary, and then the rest is secondary.
I love it. But so first, let me just say, you made urology sound like the most exciting thing in the world. So I don't know if there's probably, I know there's like a urology association or something. You need to be the face of that because the way you described it was great.
I love what I do. It's so weird. I know.
So what was your path like? Because I bring on a lot of nurses, and most of their paths looked a little bit different to get to become an NP. What did your path look like?
Oh, that's a super convoluted question, and it's a good one. I'll do my best to just synthesize it down. But pretty much I decided I didn't want to be a doctor because I thought the lifestyle was going to be tough. So trying to figure out what would substitute in that spot where it would still get me in medicine. And I chose nursing. And then I completed my bachelor's in 2008. I was a pretty young nurse. And so I got working onto a regular med-surg floor. I could tell pretty quickly that med-surg was not going to be the long game for me. It was just really taxing on the mind, the body, and I was in oncology, so very much so the soul. So I said, I can't do this forever. I need to find something else. And while I was in my bachelor's program, the nurses there were all PhD educated nurses, and they were very much pushing the role of the nurse practitioner. And you hear about it when you're in school, but you're like, let me just try to get through this. Like, I'm just trying to survive. But again, that role just kept coming up. And when I was applying for jobs as a nurse, one of the things that everybody tells you is you got to do med surg. And so it was what I ended up choosing. And as I was working in it and realizing this isn't long term, that job or the role of the nurse practitioner is really what came back to my mind. So I decided to enroll in school and start that process. And so I only worked for about probably 6 months before I realized I needed to go back and get my master's degree. And I went back and got my master's degree. I got that in 2012 and then went right to work again, not really paying attention to what my soul was desiring, what my heart was calling for. And I really enjoyed the operating room, but I didn't let myself go there for whatever reason. I just didn't think it was something that I could attain. So, I finished my master's, got to work in gastroenterology, and this is where it turned for me because I was fired from a job, and I heard another guest on your podcast had a similar jolting experience when you get fired and you get let go, and you're just like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And so I decided that at this point it was time to start figuring out my career and really what I wanted to do. And
Yes.
so I took the job that I have right now after taking a sabbatical. So trying to figure out what it is that I wanted to do. And I found myself back doing procedures in the operating room. I kind of got back to that love for my job. And so, yeah, that's what I've been doing now for going on 6 years. I've been working in the clinical setting, doing procedures, working in the operating room, stuff like that. And that's just kind of my professional career. And while I was getting my bachelor, when I was getting fired and let go, I was finishing my doctoral degree. So I have a doctorate in nursing as well. I finished that in 2016. So 2008, 2012, and 2016. Girl, I've just been hustling.
I know, right? You're on the move. And you're a mom and a wife, like crazy.
So yeah, those things came later in life. The mom and the wife. The mom and the wife roles came later in life, and they've just been super sweet. And I really wanted to be able to maximize my time in those roles. And so I actually am now only working part-time in my nurse practitioner role because it is big for me to be here with my son and to make sure that he knows that his mama is here and present and involved. So,
and you're creating the life that you deserve, what success looks like for you, not someone else. So that's great.
Exactly.
What do you think is so I got two questions. So first, what's a piece of advice that you give to someone that wants to become a nurse practitioner? That's the first question. And then what's a myth out there or misconception that people have about being nurse practitioners?
Okay, those are good questions. So for the first one, advice for somebody wanting to be a nurse practitioner or something to think about, I would really, I guess, kind of like what you were saying, what does success look like to you? And really sit down with yourself and figure that out, because the role of the nurse has a lot of benefits that in order to become a nurse practitioner, you had to be a nurse. So you've already had that certification. So I would recommend to really spend some time to figure out what success looks like in your career. Does more autonomy in that role as, a healthcare provider, is that something that you really, really want? Because with that autonomy comes a level of liability and a level of responsibility that you've really got to plug into. So if you're really wanting that and you're really wanting to see what nurses and nurse practitioners can do, then absolutely go after the role. But one of the things I do challenge nurses and that are considering it too is if you do like clocking out and not having notes to do and, also all the other drudge work with, labs you have to follow up on and prescriptions and all the other things that you have to do with this role, then it might not be for you. And that's okay. We don't all have to be nurse practitioners. And there's so much you can do with your nursing degree just before you dive into about a $70,000 to $80,000 student loan. If you haven't, been able to put money away for that, then yeah, really consider if these are the things that you want and this is the life that you're wanting.
I think you just called out something so important because especially like with social media and having access, we see people in roles and we automatically think that role is for you without asking yourself that question. Like, is this really what I want? Do I want more autonomy? Do I want this responsibility? And I think that goes with nursing and then also like entrepreneurship and working for yourself. Just because someone else is doing doesn't mean it's the right thing for you.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Go ahead.
I think I was going to say that was the first question. And then the second question is a misconception that people have. And I think, like you were saying, it's everything that you think it is until it's not. And so, you think it's this great thing and then you get there and you're like, oh, this doesn't solve my problems. Like the nurse practitioner role doesn't solve the problem of I'm not balancing my checkbooks correctly, right? So just because you step into that role and you're making more money doesn't necessarily mean that now you're flush with all this cash if you're not budgeting and doing the things as the nurse and the nurse role, right? And then also just realizing that, the nurse practitioner role, one of the things that I absolutely love about it is the scope of practice and understanding that your scope gets a lot wider, but really where do you want to operate within that scope, and then be intentional, right? And so you think that these nurses are going to get to these positions because they just get there. But what I'm finding in my conversations with nurse practitioners and nurses is that people are very intentional. They're paying attention to where they want to go. And so they're taking the steps along the way. So just like you said, it may look one way, but what's really going on in the background is a lot of intentionality.
Yeah, y'all, Dr. Magenta is dropping so many gems right on here. That first part about, and I think with nursing or with anything, just because you step into a higher salary or making more money, it don't solve all the problems if you weren't good at balancing your checkbook and managing your money before. And then I love what you said about intentions. And so we can have these intentions, but there's got to be a plan that goes with it as well on the other side. I want to talk about the podcast and like entrepreneurship and that part, because did you know that you were always going to go into that? Were you someone that always had this entrepreneurial mindset or spirit, or is it new to you?
Oh my gosh, so new. No. So it is so funny. And I think that's why I focus a lot on intentionality, is because it was never my intention to create something and do this podcast. If I would have told 18-year-old Sandra, who was sitting under the architecture building at the University of Florida, picking a degree, that she was going to be doing this, I would have laughed at you. I'd have been like, you're kidding me, you know? So absolutely not something I would have thought. But what I have learned through choosing entrepreneurship is that it begins to change you. And so the dreaming and the chasing after the dream and what it is that you're wanting from life, you actually begin to change through that process. And so it's really neat to be stepping into these conversations with other entrepreneurs, other nurses that are approaching their careers, again, very intentionally. You begin to I just love rubbing shoulders with them. I love rubbing elbows with them and hearing how they're thinking and how they're processing, because it begins to change. For me, it's changing me is what it's doing. So it's pretty incredible.
You're right. And I think, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast, and I have people talk about their journey, because there is this transformation that you go through. You really start thinking different, talking different, moving different when you come into this entrepreneurship world. But it's not something they teach us about when you're going through school or anything healthcare related. So how have you learned all the things that you need to know to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think it's one of those things that because of my doctoral degree, and you're getting your doctorate as well, so you'll understand this, that whenever you begin to approach a doctoral degree, you've got to change your mindset of like, I'm just going to do this no matter what it takes, no matter what hour of the night I'm going to be working on this or whatever, I'm just going to do it. And so one of the things that being in this space has helped me cultivate is that desire that I've got to get it done. And there is no other, there's no other option. So in order for me to learn, I've learned I don't know as much as I did the day before. Like I know less than I knew yesterday, the more that I know. And so I think it's just, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I did. Like it's moving around in my brain. I'm like, okay, I get what she's saying. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I like about it too, because again, going back to the doctoral degree, you really become this lifelong learner. And that's really what I've enjoyed about entrepreneurship as well, is that I never feel like I'm finished. And whenever I finished my doctoral degree, I remember sitting there and just being like, okay, now what? Like, that was kind of it. Like, I thought it was going to be this climactic moment. And it was kind of like, okay, now what do I do? Whereas in entrepreneurship, it's this constant ability to really push your limits and boundaries and see what you can create and see what you're able to build and see if that stuff is bringing you joy, and constantly checking in on yourself. It's been kind of one of the biggest things that I've been able to assess and really keep an eye on as I've been learning these different things. And again, I'm reading podcasts, I'm reading books constantly. I'm checking in with other entrepreneurs and seeing what they're about and what they're doing. And so that's kind of how I learn, but just also realizing that it's just a lifelong learning journey.
Yeah. I think, first of all, you just gave me another idea for another podcast episode, because you brought up how when you're getting this doctorate and you come to the end and you expect, like, I'm hoping there's going to be bells and whistles and trumpets, like all this work that went into it. And then like the day after, like you're another person that's told me this, it's just like, okay, I got the doctorate. What comes next? So we're going to have to do that episode one day. I think that we make entrepreneurship look easy, or a lot of people make it look easy, but it's actually really hard. What part of it has been hard for you, and how have you dealt with that?
I think the hardest part is just realizing not to give up. I mean, this is the constant talk in the background, right? You have to fight yourself more than even just naysayers around you, because inside of you, you're like, am I qualified to do this? Should I be doing this? Like you kind of feel like imposter syndrome, like someone's going to come and be like, she doesn't belong here. You're like, you're right, you know? And so you constantly feel that tension in the space that you're in. And again, my podcast is not supporting my lifestyle or being able to carry my family. It honestly is a love and a joy, and something that I'm just enjoying learning about as I've gone through it. And as I, again, go into the entrepreneur conversations and have these conversations with people, I'm learning so much about what people have to do to survive. And they all say it. Don't give up. Don't give up. And so that really is kind of the biggest take home I've noticed, is just, again, Sandra, fighting yourself on never giving up.
Yeah.
Just keep going.
Just keep going. I think I posted that the other day, because I'm doing this 28 days real challenge. I was like, man, I don't really want to do this, but I got to do it. You got to keep going. And the other thing I'll say is, I think that people, or what I tell people sometimes, is that there are going to be days where, if we're talking about the podcast, no one listens to the podcast. And then there's going to be some days where everybody listens to the podcast. You got to not give up through those days where you don't see any results or any movement on what you're doing. Like, I think that's one of the biggest things I've had to learn about entrepreneurship it relates to not giving up. Excuse me. What has surprised yourself, or how have you surprised yourself in going through this journey?
It is so funny. I think the thing that surprised me the most has been people saying that my podcast voice is nice. I don't know. Okay. That was the most surprising thing, because I hear my own voice all the time. So I'm like, no, I'm annoying. And so it's just funny when people are like, your podcast voice is nice. And I'm like, really? That's probably been one of the most surprising things I've gotten as far as feedback. As far as, surprising myself, I don't know. I don't really know how to answer that question. I guess I've just kind of realized maybe that I guess fighting the imposter syndrome and having conversations with people and feeling like I don't belong, and then having the surprise of, they're like, you belong right here. I'm like, yes, I do. Maybe that's it. That surprises me too. But I would say those two things maybe.
Yeah, no, and it's funny, because when you put yourself out on this platform and you're moving through different rooms, or I know even for me, like if I'm on IG and I do a live and someone's like, that was really nice, like, thanks for sharing that, I still sometimes have to be like, well, I guess I am pretty smart. And I say the same thing, like, you have a whole doctorate, Dr. Patricia. Yes, you're smart. Yes, you deserve to be in these places. I don't know. It's crazy the way our minds work.
Exactly.
What, from the podcast, because, lots of people want to start podcasting, and podcasting has been, to me, a little harder than like running my own business, actually. What's a tip that you have for people that want to start a podcast?
Okay. So I think niching down to really what you're passionate. Don't be super broad. And I know people are like, oh man, I want a wide net, catch lots of fish. Nah.
Yeah.
really what you want is a real small net
Yes.
with the idea of catching the same fish over and over and over again. And creating new ways of distributing it and displaying it. Because when you narrow down and you focus, I think you're really able to become an expert in something. Whereas if you're super broad, then you're really not able to say like, I'm really good at this because I've spent a lot of time at that. And so that would be my first recommendation. And then, have a little bit of money to be able to invest in some software and some stuff that, you can kind of keep you going, make the job a little bit easier just because it seems really glamorous. Like you're just sitting here like talking and having these conversations and sipping tea and whatever. And then you realize, oh my gosh, like I have 5 podcast episodes to edit. I got to somehow let people know that my podcast is out there. And so that's when the work starts to kick in. And again, making the work fun, enjoying the work because you got to do it. So you might as well enjoy it, which goes back to the doctorate. Just like when you're going through your doctoral program. I mean, you got to make it fun because you got to do it. So
you got to do it. Yeah. You might as well have a good time while you're doing it. So, podcaster, wife, mom, nurse practitioner, how are you balancing it all? Is there balance or is there any balance?
You don't?
Yeah.
No. So I think there's this saying that in life you can have it all. And I don't agree. I think that what you can have is different amounts of different things at different times. And so, so it doesn't look like I've got as much money as I used to when I was working as a full-time nurse practitioner, making this wonderful 6-figure salary. That's not what I have right now. I have a much less salary, but I get a lot of time with my son. And so that money gets weighed out against Benji. And so that is having it all, right? So it's not necessarily everything that you want, but it is exactly what I want for my life, is to know that I spend the most time with my family. And so I think for the listeners out there that are thinking, well, how does she do it all? I don't do it all. Like I do what I can, and then I leave the rest to the Lord. Like I just trust that like the rest of it will get done. And so I think that that's one of the things that I really want people to hear is just that, you can call it universe, whatever you're believing in. But if you stay connected to that and you hear what that's saying to you about what matters to you, that you're being true to yourself, that's you having it all. That's you balancing it, is by listening to that little still small voice that says these things matter more than all of that. And so I give up the money, I give up all the other things because I want to look back on my life and know that I prioritized first things first.
Look, I am so inspired right now on this podcast. I done got my whole life sitting here listening to you talk. What has made you, so, we hear about this great, like, resignation, people leaving healthcare. You've decided, you've stayed, and you've created a podcast that's healthcare related. Why?
Because I think there's a need.
Yes.
One of the things that I have been processing through a lot is, again, going back to that intentionality. One of the greatest things that we can leave as far as in our careers, and we are wanting this, we're all wanting a calling for our lives, not just a job. We want a calling. And so what I found is, whenever you're looking at your career, and I've worked in healthcare settings, and so I feel like that's a great place to work. There's nothing wrong with that. But as far as leaving something that's your own, that you have created, that brings you a lot of joy, that's why I move forward with the podcast, because I believe that there's a need to serve the nursing community. And so I wanted my career to start focusing in on how do I serve the nursing community with my career, not necessarily serving Sandra's own interest of making money to provide for her family. Yeah, that's important for sure. But looking at the overarching forest through the trees, how do I serve the nursing community? Is kind of where I got the podcast idea from, and where it's stemming from is, hey, listen, if you're a nurse mom that's like, I cannot do it all. I'm depressed. I'm on Prozac and Abilify, and I'm running around after my kids, and I hate dropping them off, and I never feel like I'm home. That nursing is this beautiful career that can help you create the life that you want. And I want to create those conversations. I want to inspire nurses to be able to go, listen, I'm worthy. And so I'm only going to work half the time here. And if that means that I don't drive a brand new car because I don't need that, I'd rather be home, then I'm going to normalize that discussion. Like, I want that to be normal and to be good and to be right. And we need more people having those conversations and stating out loud, that's okay if you don't want a $500,000 home because this matters more to you. You know, does that make sense? Like, having those trade-offs?
No, it does. It does make sense. And I love what you said also about you've created a business model around serving. And I think those are the businesses that last and make an impact, because it's not about, you didn't create it out of this need to make more money or put yourself on and be out there. It's about you being able to give it back and have these conversations. So I commend you for that part.
Thank you.
What, if you could go back to younger Sandra and give her one piece of advice, this thing has been full of advice, but that's because you give such great advice. What would you tell your younger self?
I wrote the word patience because I feel like there's a desire to rush through all the phases. And you heard me, bachelor's. I remember sitting at my master's degree education, my ceremony for my master's degree. And I leaned over to the girl next to me and I was like, I'm going back. And she's like, what do you mean? We're at graduation. Like, can you just, we're literally up on stage. Yeah, exactly. Right. And so as I saw, the people with their doctorates crossing before me, I was like, that's where I'm going. I'm going over there. And so I've just realized that just being present and being patient as you enjoy the journey is really important, because what you get so caught up in is in the destination and you don't really enjoy the little steps in between. And so that's what I would tell her. It's just to enjoy the journey, be patient with yourself. And yeah, those are probably my two things I would tell her. Give her a hug.
Give her a hug. I love that. That be present is so important. I mean, for me right now and working, having to remind myself of that, because what does it matter if you get all of these things, but you're not able to be present with your family and your friends? And so, like, having to have this conversation, yes, I'm an entrepreneur, but I became an entrepreneur because I wanted more time. And if I'm sitting here like on my phone while my daughter's here, I'm not really present. So that is so important. For us. What's next? Where do you see yourself? And as we just talk about being present and thankful for where we are, where is Dr. Pagenta going to be the next 5 or 10 years? What do you think you'll be doing?
So, it's so funny when I was thinking about this question, I remember thinking, again, just going back to being present, that was kind of what I wrote. And I was like, I just want to stay present. And again, whatever growth looks like for me in the next 5 years, that's really where I want to move towards. And so not staying comfortable. I think being present versus staying comfortable kind of in your career and in growing as a person. I think that's really what I want to cultivate more over the next 5 years, is just continuing to be uncomfortable with being comfortable. And so just really going, hey, listen, I feel comfortable here, which means things need to change. Because I always want to be growing and in growth, moving into the areas of fear, moving into the areas that, again, are not comfortable, are where I want to be 5 years from now, wherever that is. And again, just with my family. You're my family in 5 years.
That's where you'll be. I know. Yes. Okay. Well, so before we go, what do you want people to know about Dr. Pagenta and the Doctor Nurse podcast?
Oh, well, guys, check out the Doctor Nurse podcast if you're a nurse or a nurse practitioner that's really wanting to know what the nursing degree can do for you and how it can help you create the life that you're wanting. I mean, again, I showcase nurses that are creating businesses, that are doing multiple jobs, that aren't just in one spot. Because again, I really do believe that we can have our hands in a lot of pots. And so if one pot needs to go, or one pot is getting too hot and you got to take it off the stove, or whatever is going on, then I want you to be able to do that and be able to seamlessly move into something else and have a plan for your life.
I love it. So you all make sure that you go and check out the Dr. Nurse podcast. I will put the links in the show notes so that you can get to it. This has been a conversation with another woman in healthcare who is doing the darn thing to create the life that she deserves, how she has defined success for herself. Thank you so much for being on the show and talking to us for a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. This has been fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.